everyone. You're watching We Heart Therapy, the special series EFT Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Annabelle Bugatti, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified EFT therapist and soon to be certified EFT supervisor. And we're broadcasting live from Las Vegas, Nevada. And you probably recognize one of my favorite guests that we have on our show today. We have Michael Moran. He is one of our EFT supervisors. He's certified EFT therapist and supervisor. He's also an ASEC certified sex therapist and soon to be ASEC certified sex therapist supervisor. So those of you guys training in sex therapy, he's your guy. And we love it even more because he's an EFTer. And he is an LCSW. He has a private practice in New York City. And he co-facilitates trainings with our other EFT trainers, Zoya Semahotskaya. They co-facilitate Sex is a Safe Adventure, which is a really awesome training. If you guys haven't taken it, I really urge you to do that. We'll talk about that more at the end of the episode. But what we're going to talk about today, guys, is how to work with when you have couples where one person is completely shut down around sex and sexuality, and we're kind of talking almost like withdrawal, re-engagement, but around sex. Maybe emotionally they're engaged, but they're just really shut down and they're saying like, you know, just sex isn't on my radar. It's not really important. And so we're going to talk about that today. So welcome back, Michael. I just appreciate you being on our show again. We love having you.
Thank you, Annabelle. I always enjoy doing these with you. Thanks.
So let's talk about this. So I know this isn't like 100% trend across the board, but I have noticed a particular trend, especially in my clients that have come from religious households. And more particularly, I'm only going to speak from my personal experience, but I've experienced this more with women who grew up in religious households and some that haven't. But I've noticed a lot of them having just a lot of shutdown around sex, and sex is just for reproduction. And so there's like no sex life. And then you have the emotional withdrawal in their regular cycle starts protesting the lack of sex. And the women are like, well, I'm just not sexual. It's just not important. And so trying to help explain why this is important, or, even viewing their partner through the erotic lens. I mean, it can get to be a lot. So can you sort of start us off with helping us understand a little bit more about totally shut down sex and sexuality?
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty common. I work with it a lot. I probably get more of these cases than, the average EFT therapist, because I'm a sex therapist. So folks, come to me with this stuff, but it's, what we call hyposexual, low desire. It can be very challenging, but it can also be very gratifying to work with folks where they are, they come in with this story that they tell themselves that they're just not sexual. And so, firstly, I really join with them. Usually their partner is dragging them in, right? Because they would, never land in my office because their story, the story they tell themselves, their narrative is, I'm just not sexual. Sex is not that important to me. Kind of what's your problem? And their partner is suffering. Their partner is suffering because, obviously sex is important to them. And so the first thing I do is I normalize all of it, right? I normalize all of it. I always, there are always good reasons why people, have the experience that they do. So just like in, relational EFT, I validate it and really learn about what's going on there for them. Is this something that has, was sex never on their radar? Is the concept of gratifying sexual connection just, they can't really understand it? Many people just, the way they grew up. This is where we get into the myths about sex and, all the messages that we receive. And, often partners come together and they have very, very, very different pasts around, what sex is supposed to be. And, for many folks, you mentioned religion, and that can be a big one. And until we join them in that place, they're not gonna just give that up. That's something, most likely, that's something that has been with them a long time. You mentioned sex is procreation, right? You can appreciate someone who has gotten that message that sex is primarily about procreation. Why would they be, coming to their partner from this, from a place of, let's have more gratifying sex? They'll have sex to have children, and then, it's off the radar. So
let's kind of pause when there, because this is really important, and this is something I've come across a lot. And I know religion is one way that a lot of shame-based messages around sex and gratifying sex and sex for pleasure are kind of, I found, have been birthed. And I find with a lot of people, if their message was sex was about procreation, then unless we're making a baby, we're not having sex. And in their eyes, they think their partner is sex crazed because they just want it all the time, which really isn't the case, and it's the other,
pathologize it or what have you.
Yeah, and the other partner's like, it's just not important. And I think one of the dangers that I found about those messages is that people have learned, especially, I talking more about women, because I find this a lot with women, is that they've not learned about their bonding track and their sex track have run separately. So they've never learned that sex can be about bonding or a way to express love and connection. So when they feel safe, and I've actually also seen a lot of women, because you hear the men say, well, when we first got married, you were willing to have sex with me all the time. And I've had some feedback where ladies have told me, well, we just kind of use it as a way to solidify the relationship because we know that we've been taught men really like sex. And then as soon as they feel safe and secure, it's like, well, I don't feel the need to have sex anymore. It's not in their drive the same way it is in other people. And it doesn't pop on their radar as like, oh, I'd really like to have sex, or I'd really like to have some fulfillment with my spouse today. It just, it's like, I'm happy. I've got all my emotional attachment needs met.
Right.
But what do I even need sex for if I'm not having a baby? And that's so hard to work with, I think, in session. It's just one of the most challenging sexual scripts I've come across.
Yeah, it's if the story they tell themselves is sex is just about a certain thing and it's not about pleasure, but their partner, right? I love the term you use, bonding sex, right? But their partner is coming in and saying, look, this is one of the primary ways that I bond with you, right? This is one of the primary ways that I experience connection with you. That's very different than, the pressure coming on of, we need to have sex. We need to have sex. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's your problem? This is normal. That's very different. That's a very different message than this is one of the ways that I feel really close to you.
Yeah. And, something about that's really important too. I think of how we work with this in stage 1 versus stage 2 is stage 1, like you just said, we would put that pressure as some of the reactive moves in the cycle. In stage 2, it is like a form of withdrawal re-engagement, right? And helping them to, because a lot of times I find, again, if they're feeling connected, they don't really see their partner's desire for sex as important, and they can be very dismissive. And it's like, even though their partner may say, this helps me bond with you, they're like, well, you know, we can bond in other ways. We don't need to have sex. Like, that's just not important.
Right.
And
Is dismissive.
yes.
So they dismiss, right? Because they're disconnected from themselves in this way. And often that's where we have to get in there, right? Just like we do with good EFT. We get in there and understand the good reasons why they can't hear that their partner is wanting this from a place of more connection. Or their partner is wanting this because they, you know, sex is lifeblood for them. For many people, for some people, sex is lifeblood. For other people, it's peripheral. But if you have a couple where there's a differential there, you're going to have to figure out, you're going to have to find that sweet spot where they can come together and meet themselves. And remember, you know, people, this is where I feel EFT is so helpful when unpacking sex in long-term committed relationships with people we love, right? That's what I special in. That's what I love to do. I love to help people who love each other find that place where sex is, you know, gratifying, that does create more connection emotionally, more connection relationally, right? I think of it as sort of with this work of relational sex, I really see it as we're helping people. I even think there's a spiritual component to this, you know, because if people are more connected, if it creates more connection, then, you know, great. But people won't be vulnerable. People won't let their guard down. People won't let go of these messages and these stories that they tell themselves about who they are and what sex means to them. They're not gonna let you in or their partner in if they don't expect an empathic response. Right? Their body is going to keep coming up with the good reasons why. What is the big deal? You know, so we meet them there, we validate, and then we get underneath it. And that's why, just like with our assessment in you know, relational work, we do individual sessions. I always do individual sessions, and I join with them as to what's the block. What is, you know, help me understand the good reasons why. I notice how, you know, in that first session where you guys came in, I noticed with your partner coming forward with this and sharing about he or she, how they're, you know, how they want more gratifying connection. And I know there are good reasons why you keep batting it down. Help me learn about that. Let's join, let me into that place and let's learn together, right? And from that place, then we start to drop down into the underbelly, right?
I really like how you say, help me understand those good reasons, which can be very disarming to people who are expecting a therapist to tell them why their reasons are wrong. So to have you say, I bet you have some good reasons, and help me learn about those reasons, would just be so empathic and help that person, like, oh, okay, maybe it might be safe. But let's talk about how to go underneath that block. So, because I think that's where a lot of us get stuck, is when the person says, well, I just don't see what the big deal is. You know, we touch, we hug, we kiss, we hold hands, but I don't see a need for it to go further than that. And maybe I did get that message that sex was for procreation. Since we're not making a kid, then why does it need to go that way? You know?
This is great. I love how you're just zooming in right on the, you know, right on that place where it's, you know, so challenging. Ultimately, we have to help them see that their partner is not them, and their partner wants to have more gratifying connection with them sexually. And if it's a problem for one, it's a problem for both. And
Like,
so, right?
Sort of be like a content issue in that way. And I'm thinking, you know, as you say this, dropping this into the cycle, of course, because we're doing this in EFT. So I'm thinking, like, you know, what comes up for you when your partner says, I want to have sex tonight, or I want to be close to you, or, you know, you're fine with that physical touch, holding hands and having a kiss or a hug or holding each other. But what happens when your partner wants to go further, when they want to move their hands into a more delicate area? You know, like really honing in on their physiological cues that says, no, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. And that's where we have to back up, right? Because if their partner is organized in such a way that it's very easy for them to move toward their partner sexually, right? If one partner is organized where it's very easy, it's very fluid to begin to see their domestic person, their person, right? The person they move through time with, the person, you know, the mother or the father of their children, right? If it's very easy for them, if there's fluidity there where they can begin to see their domestic partner through the erotic lens. But how about their partner? How about if their partner is organized very differently and they haven't learned about that, right? They haven't talked about that. They haven't been vulnerable about that. Then how is this person supposed to just snap their fingers and allow their body, allow their erotic energy to come alive? Of course, there's going to be a hard stop there. And that's so much of what we're doing. And I think, you know, as EFT therapists, it's like, we're so equipped to go into that place.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You
I
know?
think saying, you know, the erotic lens, I like that. If you haven't really learned to view your partner through the erotic lens, right, in more than just a procreative kind of way, but a way where you can look at your partner and allow yourself to get aroused or excited or filled with desire, right? And I think one of the ways that we would track that is just kind of like we would with the emotional cycle. What comes up for you when this happens, right? It doesn't even always have to be like an overt pass, like, hey, let's have sex. And maybe it is, and we could process that. What comes up for you when your partner says this? Tell me about the part that says, no, I don't think so. This isn't a big deal, right? Just like we would if it was their emotions, right? If their partner's saying, I want to have this fulfilling conversation with you, and their partner's like, no, I don't see why you want me to be in a conversation. It's kind of the same thing, right? Just different.
In many ways it is. You know, I'm thinking of a couple I'm working with right now where this is, you know, I can give this example because it's so appropriate with what you're describing. What we're learning, you know, this is they're both, you know, they're a lovely couple. They both really take impeccable care of themselves. She's very, very beautiful. And what we're learning is that in order for her to begin to turn toward that energy, right? She needs a lot of, you look so beautiful tonight. You look amazing in that dress. Very specific, you know, very specific messages that allow her to drop into her body and start to feel that energy. But they're pretty specific. It isn't like, oh, you look nice tonight, honey. That doesn't do it. That doesn't do it.
The other partner, as you're saying this, I can imagine the other partner coming up, at least even for my couples, like, oh, so if I don't say it in exactly the way you want me to say it, then that means no sex, right? It's be frustrating.
Right.
Always.
And then they go into this place where they're failing, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I like that. And really, you know, I think that's part of why we talk about sex in stage 2, even though we may map it as their reactive cycle in stage 1, but stage 2, you know, being able to turn towards that energy, right, and what they need, right? So those needs would be step 5, 6, and 7, right?
That's right.
The asking and bonding in this case would be in a sexual way that we're bonding, but in order to access needs, we have to get into stage 2, right? So this is a lot of why we deal with sex in the deeper ways in stage 2. We can get to that person down to what the blocks that come up for you, view of self, view of others, you know, maybe I worry that I'm fundamentally unattractive to my partner because I've struggled with self-esteem. You know, the part of you that emotionally says, I don't know that I'm really loved, maybe in that sexual way and say, well, if I don't know that I'm really loved, how can I trust that you see me as attractive? But also really, if we're talking about somebody who's never really looked at their partner in the erotic lens, just like we would with emotional withdrawers who have never thought about opening up their emotional world to their partner and letting them into that, I see the parallels here, right? So it's like withdrawal re-engagement around sex. What would it be like to allow yourself to go into that place and see yourself as a sexual person and see your partner in this way?
It's a big part of it. You know, if you don't see yourself as a sexual person, how are you going to allow your body to go there with this person you love? You're bringing up so many great points there. You know, the way we work with sex in stage 1 is different than in stage 2, right? The helicopter comes down and goes back up in stage 1. The helicopter lands in lands and stays in stage 2. That said, sometimes folks think, I mean, we've bumped up against this a lot as we're training therapists. Some folks think that you can't work with sex in stage 1. It's not true. And, you know, we have tapes where a couple comes in around this issue, that this is one of the main blocks. You have to work with it in stage 1, right? It's not an option. Yes, it's easier to work with it. There's more fluidity in stage 2 with it. And yes, you're doing those steps of 5, 6, and 7 to really restructure the relationship. But oftentimes we have to bring in sex in stage 1, and that's where we start to map out their sexual cycle. There's the relational cycle, right? There's the sexual cycle, and they're inextricably linked. They're different systems, but they're inextricably linked. And we start mapping that out.
So let's put this into the model for stage 1 versus stage 2. So part of what I've learned about stage 1 is we're working on emotional presence, right? With a lot of reactivity, whether that person's reactivity is getting really escalated and fighting and protesting, it's hard for them to be present with their own emotions or their partner's emotions, or the person who's retreating into their cave, you know, and avoiding the conflict and avoiding the conversation. They're also not being present. So with the de-escalation process, it's a lot to do with emotional presence. So you'd be mapping, you know, who is the first person who, and I love something, I think it was Scott Woolley, one of our other EFT trainers, who once said that the cycle starts, maybe it was Becca, who said the cycle starts with somebody being vulnerable. So it could be one person in terms of sex, recognizing their desire, their longing to turn to their partner, but then they're like checking kind of like they would emotionally. Like if I, you know, was a anxious pursuer emotionally, and I might really want to talk to my partner or have them be close, and I'm sensing they're not available, right? So I'm looking for their cues. So we're tracking these moves. Like, what do you do when you notice that desire? How do you move towards your partner, ask for them, or study their moves and anticipate whether or not they'll be available? And then, you know, when your partner does turn away, do you protest, or, you know, or the withdrawing partner? This part of you, something happens when your partner moves towards you and says, I want to have sex. What do you tell yourself? You know, the perceptions, what happens in your body that says, uh-oh, danger, gotta go away. You know, just like we would, exactly the same as the emotional process. But in this, like you said, we would put sex as a content issue. But we want to help, I guess, and jump in and tell me, you know, at the end of stage 1, when it comes to sex, would at least be helping each other be more present with, okay, there's this elephant in the room that we need to deal with. And if I turn away, it increases my partner's anxiety. If I get really anxious and sort of pursue my partner, that creates anxiety for them and they shut down. And then we can't stay in this conversation about sex and talk about that more.
Yeah, no, it's, I think you're really zooming into the one of the main components of working with folks around sex. Look, remember, the more we protect ourselves, the more distance we create. So as we're working toward de-escalation with sex, because they come in with this reactive cycle around that they can't even talk with themselves, talk with each other about what's really going on there. As we start to map it out and give them a felt sense of the good reasons why they get stuck, things start to calm down. Often folks are coming in really pathologizing the other partner, and then there's a lot of reactivity. And remember, just because this is something that I'm seeing a lot. We're always evolving, we're always learning, just like in EFT. And remember, just because someone is pursuing for sex does not mean that they're really available, that they're really coming forward with what's going on underneath that, right?
That's important. Let's stop there. This is super, super important. I love that you're bringing this up. Thank you. This is one of the things I've learned, that there's a difference between a pursuer and a withdrawer versus avoidant or not. Because I've had people show up, present in the cycle as a pursuer, but emotionally they couldn't be more avoidant, right? Everything they were pursuing on the surface, but as soon as you get to anything vulnerable or deep, pew, they ricochet out of there.
That's right. And many withdrawers are organized to, self-soothe with sex, but it doesn't mean that they're really emotionally available. And so that's all well and good in the realm of casual and anonymous sex. Doesn't, so what? But as soon as the stakes get high with someone we love, bang, there's the block. Right? Yeah. So you have to slow all that down and help the withdrawing part, the partner that's pursuing for sex, but is really, the withdrawer in the relationship.
I just thought of something as you mentioned casual and anonymous sex, and I heard a client's voice in my head that said, yeah, but when I was having casual and anonymous sex, I felt like I could be more open and adventurous. And
exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
They're taking like openness and adventurousness with vulnerability, I think, because when it's with a stranger or anonymous or just casual sex, you're not expecting to see them again. So you can
there is no vulnerability.
Right. So you can kind of detach from that process of being open and adventurous, and it's not so scary because you're not expecting to look them in the face again, right? But if it's your partner,
right. That's exactly right.
To have them like really see you in this place, because sex is extremely vulnerable. And so to have them really see you and then see you again the next day, it's like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with them seeing me that way.
That's right. And start attaching, right? Start really creating attachment where they're really letting their partner in. That's often when sex goes offline. I've worked with avoidant and anxious people, where men and women, where, when that part of them, when they start really connecting with their partner, you think, why would that be? But I've worked with many people that, when the attachment does occur and this person, is really important to you, that's often when, their willingness window, we talk about the willingness to become sexual. That's when things start to reorganize. They're a block. That's when the barrier starts to occur. And that's where we come in to help them really understand the good reasons why that's occurring. Yeah, your partner is so important to you that now your body's shutting down. I remember working with this guy. It's like one of those sessions, we have those sessions that they just get they get lodged into your brain and your nervous system where you'll never forget. This guy, I remember him talking about how the sex was awesome. The sex was great. We were having such a great time. And then I realized I was falling in love with her. And that's when his erectile dysfunction came online. And then that's often, a freight train, because then the body starts to betray you, and then you start worrying about the body betraying you. And then the more you worry, the more, right, as for the vast majority of us, we talk about this all the time, as our anxiety increases, our sexual response recedes, and then he starts freaking out because he had never experienced erectile dysfunction before.
I've actually,
But this was also the first time that he was in a, that he fell in love. This guy was like in his late 20s. So it's really interesting.
that makes sense. And, something else pinged you said that is I was thinking that there's actually, now that you brought that up, two ways that the body can betray you. It's when you don't want your body to respond and it does, because maybe you're in like a traumatizing situation or like sexual abuse situation, or you want your body to respond and it doesn't, right?
That's right. The stakes are high. That's right.
And
Yeah.
both create elements of shame and anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which are both hijack that sexual desire and your body's ability to respond.
That's right. And now if we go back to your original, inquiry where you talked about, women who are religious and they come with this sort of narrative, which is the top, right? This cognitive narrative around sex as procreation. But often as you slow things down, you'll learn their body never really learned to respond and they feel ashamed about it, but they can't talk about it. They can't talk about it with their partner. They can't let their partner in to that inner world where they have shame about what's wrong with me, right? And so your job is to create a safe space for them to come forward. That's why, Emily Nagoski's work is so important for these, especially for these women who are shut down sexually, to learn to shift from, this narrative that, what's wrong with me, to what we talk about, pleasure is the measure, right? How about coming forward with your partner from a place of, can we learn together where pleasure is for me? But they're buried under this feeling of like, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. And so what do we do when we're not able to feel vulnerable in our relationship? We go up to the top and we create a story like, what's wrong with you? You're sick. Sex is about procreation, all the different things. But underneath that is often a sense of brokenness or, shame about what's really going on. But they are often not even aware of that themselves.
Right.
They're very peripherally aware. They haven't really explored that. And that's why our work, I think, with sex is so sacred, because often, when are we more vulnerable around sex?
Right. So what I hear you say, Michael, is that when it comes to, so people who maybe aren't aware of their deeper moves, of what's happening to them on a physical realm. I love how you said they pop up and they go to their narrative, sex is just for procreation, or they may blame their partner, you want sex too much, whatever. I think where we would slow it down is go into those micro moves, right? What happens right now as your partner says, I want to have more sex? Or what happens when your partner puts his hand on your leg and starts to try to, gives you that signal, I want more than just to hold you in a non-sexual kind of way, right? What comes online? What moves on the inside? What perceptions do you have, right? I've had a lot of women who struggle with, well, I think this is just where their mind might go to. Maybe it's hormones, maybe there's something physically wrong with me, but then they avoid going to the doctor to have a discussion about it and find out what could help them. They just completely shut down and avoid it, right? It's like, well, my emotional attachment needs are met and we have a really positive relationship otherwise, so I don't see what's the big deal. So they make it not a big deal for them, and then they really dismiss the fact that it might be important to their partner, and their partner's getting these rejection cues all around, and they're not really seeing where their partner is at.
That's right. And remember, they're not, oftentimes what's happening is they're stuck in the reactive place with themselves and they're not seeing what's really going on for themselves. So if that's the case, why on earth would they be able to see what's going on for their partner? If they're pathologizing themselves in the underbelly, why wouldn't they be doing that with their partner? You're bringing up so many good points. So I want to touch on two important things. One, because we're talking about stage one versus stage two. As we de-escalate them, right, the helicopter is able to start landing and staying more. That's when we start to have deeper conversations around what we've identified in stage one. as they're able to start dropping into this place where they've often just, held a barrier and not really been able to explore with themselves, let alone with their partner, right?
So this is where step 5 is kind of like that step 3. Sorry to jump in on you. It's,
Right.
as we,
Now we're in step 5. That's right.
yeah, it's not only where now we've built that presence, right? I love the metaphor of the helicopter. The helicopter is landing and it's able to stay more. Now we want to work on getting it to turn off the engine and let the people get out, right? We want to work on engagement, right? And I kind of think of it as that window of tolerance where we can tolerate it enough to be present, and that comes out of the end of stage 1. Now we go much deeper and we have that platform of presence that we can expand the presence into something deeper of engagement, where not only are they engaging with their partner, but really I think step 5 has a lot to do with engaging with themselves, right?
Intrapsychic work. Yeah.
Yes. Love how you say, if they're not able to see themselves, they're not going to be able to see their partner. That's always where the blocks to empathy come from. Because you have to be a resonant chamber to see somebody else, right? And if nothing's resonating, if it's closed, nothing's going through there, right? Just as we do emotionally, right? So we're helping them exactly like we would with stage 2, step 5 for emotional, for the emotional part with like the withdrawer, because we start with withdrawal re-engagement first. It would be just like we would say, how would it be to start to see yourself as someone with emotional and attachment needs, and to be more present with your own needs and desires and longings emotionally. Now we're doing that sexually. What would it be like to see yourself as a sexual being, as somebody who has pleasures, and to allow yourself to touch down to that area more deeply?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So then as we move into the deeper stage 2 waters, that's where we really start helping folks understand how they're more organized, how they're organized sexually, and the good reasons why they did get stuck. And, remember, some people are organized pretty simply around sex. Some people, they're just, they're doing their thing. It's very easy for them, like we were talking about earlier, it's very easy for them to turn to their domestic partner, the person they love, and their sexual energy to come alive. Many people are not. Many people have an intricate set of bells and whistles that need to go off in order for their willingness window to unlock and open and really allow that energy to come alive. And so once we've done that work, and now we're in step 5, sexual withdrawal re-engagement, that's where you're doing that deeper intrapsychic work of really helping them feel into these places where they were really cut off before. And remember, as you're doing that, now you're giving their partner a window into, no wonder it was so hard for them. No wonder they stuck to this story, this narrative. They didn't know. They didn't know. And of course, that creates more empathy, right? I'm sorry?
The pursuer softening, right?
The pursuer starts to calm down in that place, because remember, underneath that is like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? All of this. And then they start to calm down because they're now getting more of a window in to where how their partner is organized around sex.
And they can start to have more empathy as well for their partner to see, especially as they start to see that the shutdown, the withdrawal, isn't about their partner not wanting them or not loving them or being attracted to them. It's about some of their own stuff, right? Just as we do with the emotional world.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So as we do this withdrawal re-engagement, sexual withdrawal re-engagement, and sexual pursuer softening, that's very exciting work, because that's where you're really restructuring their capacity to turn to each other and learn about what goes on there. Now, this is important. So now we're moving to stage 3, right? This is where you get to do the really awesome, interesting work around helping them really turn to each other and create that special place where they can become more sexual, where they can really learn about this is what's, this is what gets me going and this is what gets you going. How do we find that place where where both of our needs are met, and they really start to partner together, right? We're always talking about with sex, you have to get the couple working as a team. Right. And that's why I feel EFT is so important. Barry McCarthy, who's a big sex therapist in the field, he's always talking about get the couple working as a team, get them working as a team. And that's where I feel EFT comes in, because once they're working as a team, now we really start to do the work of understanding how they're each wired and what they both need. And they can create gratifying erotic connection. It's emotionally connected, but it's also erotic fulfillment, sexual fulfillment.
Okay, this is good, because we haven't really talked much about step 3 or stage 3. And actually I do need to do a video about this, because poor little stage 3 gets very neglected. And I think that
it's true.
Like we do stage 1 and stage 2, we get to the end of stage 2, everything's working great. Okay, see you later, right? We don't really, So what I hear you saying is that when it comes to sex, in terms of stage 2 versus stage 3, so this is after they've already been able to learn how to ask and bond, right? In this case, it would be sexual.
Around sex. That's right. That's right.
Can see themselves as a sexual being, can see their partner as a sexual being, and now they can begin to engage more deeply and ask and bond in that way. And the pursuer can now ask for their sexual needs or closeness. I know we get in trouble, sexual needs, sexual desire, their need to be close, and ask in a softer kind of way, not a like, what's wrong with you kind of way. So they're learning to ask and bond, and now they're using that ability, step 8, stage 3, new solutions to old problems, right?
I was going to say that. Yep, exactly. And this is where it's really interesting how folks can come forward in ways that they were not previously able to do. I've worked with folks where, I remember this was a straight couple where, he wanted more sexual play around like sort of the BDSM continuum. He wanted to bring in feathers. He wanted, some hot wax, nothing too extreme, but he wanted more sexual play. But he knew his partner was organized, very differently. And she would never send signals of being open to that. But once they were really bonded, she was more available to play in that way. It's why we call sex a safe adventure. Once they're bonded in that place and they're no longer, shooting arrows or bullets at each other, then why not give it a whirl, see what happens? And she's much more, she was much more available to that.
Yeah. So now, what I hear you saying in terms of stage 3, these new solutions are now that we're not so reactive around sex. We're not shooting bullets. We're also not running and ducking for cover in the safety of our cage.
Right.
Now we're able to see each other both as sexual beings. We're able to plug into our own desire and turn to each other and safely ask for that and bond in that way. Now we take that even a step further and say, now we can start experimenting and having adventure, and we can coordinate that together because there's that safety of bonding. And I know I'm in your hands and in your heart to do this.
That's right. That's right. Here, I'll give you another example of this. I worked with a gay couple where, they were, this is probably one of the most like beautiful couples I've ever worked with. This is like, Chelsea, I work in New York City. So these guys that come in that are just, they've worked out in the gym, they're, perfect body, perfect hair, perfect face, perfect job, perfect apartment, all of this. And they came in at a vulnerable time because they were getting older. And the one partner who so much of his self-esteem was wrapped around being this, sexual dynamo, and he was getting older, but he couldn't talk to his partner about, all of how that was playing out in his body. And as we did the deeper work and he started coming forward with, yeah, when we're having sex, my back aches now. My back aches, but I don't feel like I can, it was all I could do. I didn't want to show you that. So, but then of course you start hurting, that kind of pain is not, that's not hot. So then he would lose his erection and off we go. So as we started restructuring that, right, they were able to come forward and learn about, see, this is where you get into sex through the life cycle. They were able to learn about what gratifying sex is about for them now, but they got stuck. They got stuck for good reason, right?
So I love that. So I hear, and I think a lot of our couples go through that as they try to hang on to the sex, what was gratifying sex for them when they were in their 20s and they're old. And, I've had a lot of men who have struggled with testosterone levels dropping, and that's been a really big problem for them. And there's a lot of shame around that because they're hanging on to what sex should be like as a 20-year-old. And society doesn't do our men justice in this. They make them seem like, well, you should just, like the Energizer Bunny, you should just be able to keep going forever till you're in the grave, right? And so they
right.
They have all this shame, like I can't keep going, my body, something else is happening with my body, and
exactly.
Whack. So helping them to feel more safe and vulnerable, that their body is changing, that they're going to have to readjust what they can and can't do to meet the realities of their physical bodies, especially if some have become maybe disabled or partially disabled. They're going to they can still have a gratifying sex life, but they're going to have to make some adjustments. But if they can't be vulnerable and talk about that, they won't ever be able to have those new solutions to old relationship problems.
That's exactly right. That's where, I'll often bring in Brene Brown's work, where she talks about how, one of the primary vulnerabilities for women is body image and, beauty. And that's where they kind of get their power in the culture. Of course, all generalizations being false, but that's where often they're getting their power. And for men, it's about, their primary vulnerability is about appearing weak. And that certainly was the case with my example that I just gave about this gay couple. So often as we age, right, remember, sex is dependent on our physiology in a way that is not, that emotional relational connection is not. So often there's deep vulnerabilities there. One of the things when I was doing my sex therapy training that I always try to talk about when we do these trainings is, I didn't realize about my own bias about gratifying sexual connection. I had to watch, as part of my training, I watched several videos of 80-year-olds having sex, being sexual. And, these 80-year-old bodies. And these folks, and it's so reflective of Peggy Kleinplatz's work around optimal sexuality, these folks were enjoying themselves. I mean, they were having gratifying sex as a safe adventure. They were really connecting. And I remember it was so powerful for me because I didn't realize how I had equated, hot sex or gratifying sex as the sex therapist, as in like the younger body, in the body that we are culturally attuned to think that that's the body, that's the mechanism for amazing sex. And so this is where it's important for us to all just be present for what we learned about sex, the messages we received. We're another, we're the third person in the room, and to really kind of open our hearts to our own experience of sex, because if we don't, we can get stuck.
I love that. Interesting enough, senior citizens are actually the fastest rising STD population in the United States. So clearly they're having some gratifying sex. And you do find this, I've had folks come in for therapy where maybe one partner was in a home, but they're still trying to engage in gratifying sex, and the kids are like so against this, you shouldn't be doing that. And it's like, you know, so you can see their own bias coming up that, you know,
Absolutely.
sex has to stop. And I have seen this come up. I love that you mentioned that word bias. Is I see it pop up with, it's like a cultural bias or a message bias that we get by society. And I see that, I think that's one of the ways that it shows up for a lot of women is that, well, you know, you have your kids and, you know, sex, somewhere along the line, a few of my clients have gotten this message that you're supposed to stop having sex in your marriage, and sex marriages are normal. Everybody has them. So you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to fix it. Just
That's right.
enjoy the fact that you don't have to work at it anymore. And
That's right. That's right. And often there's a lot of vulnerability under there that they will not drop into because they don't feel safe talking to their partner about it. So then the culture then propagates this message that it's okay, it's fine. You had sex to have kids. Now your life is about the kids, right?
Yes.
But, you know, for folks who really, really enjoy and appreciate and want gratifying sexual connection, that's not going to work for them. Remember, the couples where both people have bought into that, they're probably not going to land in your office. Or if they do, when you, in a relational, you know, sense, when you ask them about sex, there's probably not going to be a lot of distress there. Now, this is what's interesting, as you create greater relational connection, then one of them starts dropping into, man, I would like to experience this kind of closeness sexually with you again. Not always, but sometimes. And remember, we take our cue from our couple.
Well, and what's funny is that, yeah, I love that you say not a lot of distress there, because there are, you know, that was one of my couples was just like that, had this really positive relationship, but it was really positive on the surface. They were never stirring the pot, and they were able to get through 10 years of their marriage this way until they didn't, right? And one partner was reaching and asking for sex, and the female was completely shut down and was getting reinforcements of this family friend saying, nope, don't worry, none of us have sex with our husbands, don't even worry about it. And I was like, oh my God. When I hear this, I'm like, ah!
What do I do? Right.
Spouse had an affair. And it was, of course, it was quite accidental, but now it's like, oh, well, I guess maybe there was something to that, you know, when my was asking, you know, and finding out that there are some shame messages like, oh, sex was really painful. And because it was painful, and then my friends were telling me I don't need to have sex, it became this whole way that I avoided it, and I didn't go to it. And
was she able to come forward and tell her partner, look, sex is painful for me now. I'm not sure what's changed, but sex is painful. Was she able to let her partner know that?
Has let him know that. They've actually both known that it was painful, but instead of having a conversation about what can we do to remedy that pain, it was just she completely shut down and became very unavailable. So now we are, you know, tracking those messages. What happens when your partner reaches for you in an erotic way, right? You know, we're kind of studying that erotic mind.
Now,
Where's the erotic heart in your guys' cycle, right? What are the messages, the moves, the vulnerability that comes up, the part of you that says, uh-oh, move away, just like we would if we were just tracking their emotional cycle. It's like parallel. They're just almost exactly the same, except one is emotional, one is sexual, but they're so tied. Even the process that we go through in unpacking this and working with it in stage 1, 2, or 3 is exactly the same way, right? Just swap out, if you're thinking like, how will we track this if this is just their emotional cycle? Just swap emotional for sexual and you'll get it the same way, right? All the same steps, all the same moves, all the same questions you would ask. What comes up for you right here, right now, right? When this happens. Right? Tell me about your body. What does your body say? How does your body give you these cues that say, nope, not going to go there, shut down, right?
And pain will often do that. Couple quick points about that. with, pain during intercourse, what have you, if that, is acquired versus lifelong, they may, I would suggest them seeing a gynecologist who specializes in sexual health, just to ensure, just to see if there have been physiological changes that can occur. The other piece that I work around with that is, we're so, the intercourse discourse, where our culture tends to be so focused around intercourse is sex. And there's a lot of pleasure that can occur beyond beyond intercourse. And so pleasure is the measure again, really helping folks, come together.
What their sexuality is like. Because I have a couple, it's a double trauma couple actually, but one of them had sexual trauma and also is partially physically disabled. So there's a lot of physical pain there and an inability to engage in actual intercourse. And so what other ways, and
Beautiful.
This is key ways that I see vulnerability show up in sex is when I ask, can you even engage in sexual play involving your partner in the process, right? Because a sexual relationship is about involving your partner in that process, whether it is directly through intercourse or something else. But can you guys make eye contact or allow your partner to see you orgasm? I found a lot of couples say, no, I turn away, I close my eyes. That's really vulnerable. And that's one of the ways that I study vulnerability in their sex life.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful work. You mentioned earlier about these no conflict couples. That doesn't necessarily, right? We've learned that doesn't necessarily mean they're securely bonded. In fact, if they can't fight, it's not about the conflict, it's about the repair. And these are, they're two different people with two different realities and life histories that live in those nervous systems. But often if they can't lean in to these places where they're so different, this is what, we help folks differentiate in EFT all the time, right? We differentiate with each other, not from each other. But this is important with sex because we're different people. And how do we create this erotic feedback loop if we're enmeshed? EFT is very helpful in helping folks, lean into these places where they are so different. And this is a key piece with creating gratifying sex, creating this erotic feedback loop that's so important with, we talk about spontaneous versus responsive desire. That's so important in creating this responsive feedback loop that all of us in long-term committed relationships where we can't depend on the newness of a new body, where vulnerability the stakes are high. How do we create this responsive feedback loop? So it's so important. I'm glad you brought that up.
I love that. So just to summarize before we wrap up. So with sex, we can work with it in stage 1. Of course, we're always going to start with stage 1. We're going to map their sexual cycle. What does it look like? What are the moves? What are the perceptions? What happens? Just like you would in their emotional cycle, right? The way that we either move towards or move away. And we're working on helping them be more present to tolerate both their partner's sexual world and interact with their own self in a way that they can begin to see themselves as sexual. And then stage 2, we're expanding that. We're going, it's like emotional presence on steroids. We're going into engagement. We start just like with the emotional cycle, withdrawal re-engagement, but I love how we call it sexual withdrawal re-engagement. It's awesome. And this is where you really unpack those deeper parts, the view of self, view of others, especially for people that have grown up with these scripts where they've learned we don't use sex to bond. And yes, maybe I've been able to have pleasure with sex, but it's not important because, I've got all my bonding needs met. And so sex is like out the window, right? But there's still a partner there who's seeing them as sexual and wants to be sexual. And there's still a part of them moving away from that and saying, no, I don't think that's for me. So we're going to go really deeper into that and help them engage with their own inner world to see themselves as the sexual being, allow them to start dialing into their own desires and their partners. And we're going to help them see and accept, themselves and their partner Step 6. And ask and bond in a sexual way. Same thing with pursuer softening. Help them start to ask, see and accept where their partner is at, and what the shutdown has been around, that it's not necessarily about, I'm not lovable, they don't want to be with me, they're rejecting me, but it's, something inside of them. But also to be able to turn and ask for their sexual needs without jumping to, what's wrong with you? Maybe you need to go to the doctor, that kind of thing.
Right.
And we're going to help them turn to each other and start bonding in a sexual way. And when they're able to start doing that, we do stage 3. I love you're the first one to really paint anything into stage 3. So this is just absolutely terrific. So stage 3, ding, new solutions to old relationship problems, where now that we can bond, we can be vulnerable, we can be in touch with our own sexual desires, and we can turn and ask for those with our partner. Now, what used to be like a boring, ungratifying sex life, now we can start engaging and experimenting and adventuring together. Now we have that vulnerability and that safety to do that.
That's right. That's right. And we like you were saying, right? We open to our own intersexual world, and we can turn and share, and we can open our hearts, minds, and bodies to our partner's intersexual world, and we can lean in and turn toward that. And from that place, that's where we create this responsive feedback loop that's so gratifying.
Yeah, and I like that, because we want to find out through this process, are they really engaging with because their body is linked to their emotions. And some people, in order to have even like romantic relationships or regular relationships, they have to detach emotionally from their own world so they can engage. But you find that their relationships don't tend to get very deep, or they're coming into couples therapy because their partner says, I can't get them to open up to me, right? Same thing with sexuality, right? Are they engaging, have they engaged in sex from a very detached place, which makes it hard for them to, again, see their own inner world, see their own vulnerability, be with their partner's vulnerability. And we want to help them integrate and connect emotionally to their own body, to their own vulnerability that occurs through sex, and use that, reshape it, right? Reshape it from a scary place to an exciting and adventurous place, right? Where in that vulnerability, new and exciting and wonderful, awesome things can happen, right? Versus scary things in the past, right? That's part of that reshaping that bond. So that's going to be really exciting. And Michael, I just so appreciate you being here and talking to us about this. And my mind is already buzzing with some more topics along sex that we could talk about, which is super exciting. So now tell us where folks can find you. Can they contact you for supervision, for workshops? Tell us what you've got.
Sure. Well, Zoe and I are, we're currently on the road doing our Sex is Safe Adventure workshop. We just did that workshop in Denver. And now we have a little bit of a break. Of course, Zoe never has a break. She's always on the road. But we're going to be doing it again in Oslo, Norway, and then Stockholm. And I think we have some other, I think we're going to be doing it in Seattle next year. So, those workshops are always kind of getting planned. And you'll hear about them on the listserv and what have you. As far as myself, you can contact me at Mike@fulfilledcouples, plural, Mike@fulfilledcouples.com. And yes, I'm available for individual supervision or consults around sex or what have you. So I love deepening. I love addressing and working with sex through the EFT model. I think it's very effective.
It's amazing. And of course, if folks are interested in having you come to their area, having you and Zoya come do an EFT training on Sex is a Safe Adventure, all they have to do is send you guys an email and you guys will coordinate, and you guys are available to do that, which is terrific, guys. So definitely look them up. If you haven't had Sex is a Safe Adventure in your area, absolutely have Mike and Zoya come out and do their training. It's fantastic. And, there are a lot of the EFT therapists out there who are looking for more supervision and more training around sex therapy. A lot of folks are looking to get that certification as a sex therapist. Mike is your guy. He is absolutely wonderful and phenomenal. And I'm going to put the links to your information in the description for this video. So just thank you so much again, Michael. This has just been fulfilling for me, and I hope for our viewers as well.
Oh, well, thank you, Annabelle. It's always, it's always an engaging conversation with you. I can see the synapses firing as I talk, and then you give me great feedback. So it's always really gratifying to just talk with you about this, unpack it all with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you again so much, Mike. And thank you to our viewers, guys. Thanks for subscribing and watching, and for all of your feedback. I'm always welcome to more topics if you guys have ideas. But just make sure in the meantime, guys, that if you haven't hit subscribe, that you do so now, because more videos are on the way.